Well, hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar, Optimizing Safety and Efficiency in Warehouses. I'm Heather Chapman and will be your host and one of the speakers today. I've worked in the health and safety field for over 20 years and have worked in a lot of different industries, helping these different organizations really optimize safety performance and change and improve cultures. One thing that's been a common thread throughout all industries is ergonomics. And while the risk factors and some of the exposures may be different, we all struggle with finding ways to improve the work environment, to make work easier for our employees while also keeping the outputs high. So I'm happy to speak with you today and share some of my experiences and thoughts. Also joining me today is Vic Jacinto from IKEA. Vic, could you tell the attendees a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. I'm Vic Jacinto. I work for IKEA in the U.S. I oversee our safety and security program, risk compliance, asset protection. It has all kinds of different names, loss prevention. I've worked for IKEA for over 20 years. Um, I've worked in the retail industry for over 30 years with several different retailers. My journey at IKEA, although it spans 2 decades, I still feel like I'm new and learning, certainly in the ergonomics area of safety, and we're just scratching the surface. So I appreciate the partnership. Oh, I lost your audio.
Well, I'm glad to have you here today, Vic. Some of the things we're going to be talking about today are around, how do we identify these ergonomic hazards or risk factors? How do we educate the workforce and really make sure that they're learning and working to improve their ergonomics? We'll talk through some workflow changes and design ideas. How do you evaluate your ergonomic interventions? So you've made some changes, but how do you know it was the right change and that it actually reduced those ergonomic risk factors? How do we overcome barriers to ergonomic improvements? And we'll talk through a couple of use cases and examples as well. So we know from decades of experience and data that ergonomic injuries make up about a third of all injuries, and yet they cost and make up more than 50% of all workers' compensation costs. So we couple that with high turnover rates, and we essentially set the stage for reduced productivity and outputs. Now, we've seen this type of warehousing work that requires employees to bend and reach and twist frequently. And what if we could change their behaviors and help employees to move in ways that reduces their risk of back and shoulder injuries? That's part of what we're going to discuss today. When I started my career, I worked for an organization that had a lot of ergonomic injuries. In fact, their total recordable rate, if you're familiar with that, was 26.4. It's quite high. And the industry average for them was closer to a 4.6. When I started digging into the data, more than half of their injuries, in fact, 60 to 70% of their injuries year over year, were ergonomic in nature. And it makes you wonder why? Why aren't we fixing things? Why aren't we making some adjustments? We should be making changes. Now, this particular organization, they have warehousing, they have production, and they have packaging all within the same facility. Most of their injuries were coming from a couple of production lines and their warehouse. And in the warehouse, it turns out they were handling a lot of 55-gallon drums and bags or boxes that weighed 100 pounds. And this was all done manually. There was no type of ergonomic intervention. So we spent 5 years making a number of changes, both from an admin control perspective, but also, implementing different types of tools like drum lifters that people could use so that we alleviated some of those risk factors for them. What I wish we had had back then, 20 years ago, was something that could have helped actually train people in ergonomics. So all these things I'm talking about, making these bigger changes, process changes, and buying drum lifters and pallet lift tables, those are great, but they cost money. And oftentimes when we're looking at bigger control measures, they're going to cost more money and we have to budget for those things. So it's generally not something that can happen within 30 days. It might take 3 months. What would have been great is if I could have used something like this device we're looking at. This is, in fact, a wearable device geared towards improving body mechanics. And this is what we, partnered with IKEA on to launch as a test. But this particular device essentially can be worn on the back or on the arm to monitor shoulder movements. And what it does is help people realize through real-time feedback when they're moving in a way that puts them at risk. So say they bend at the waist and they bend to the ground to pick up a box, that device will beep and vibrate at them. So they're getting real-time feedback to say, hey, you just put yourself at risk, and it helps them change. And typically what we'll see over a course of 2 weeks, when that employee wears the device every day for their work shift, they'll reduce their hazardous movements by 30 to 50%. So that's pretty substantial for a training. Um, I suspect that that's way more effective than me going out to the floor and talking to somebody about ergonomics and trying to suggest better ways to move. When you actually have a device, it's essentially like having a trainer at your side coaching you through good body mechanics. Now, when we look at this device, for the spine, these are the types of hazards the device will look for. And these are definitely things that we see in the warehouse. Bending to the ground, twisting of the spine. You're reaching for things underneath a rack and then you're twisting to put it on a pallet, or you're transferring product from one pallet to another. It's a lot of twisting in the spine. And then intense bending. So while the device may not know exactly how much a product weighs, it can understand if somebody's moving something heavy, because the way our muscles respond changes. Moving 5 pounds versus 75 pounds is a big difference in how your body moves, and the device can detect that. So when those movements are made, that device gives them a little beep and vibration to let them know, hey, you just put yourself at risk. And hopefully they learn and adjust their movements. Now for the shoulder side, very similar, real-time feedback, but this time it's for arm elevation, pushing and pulling, and then overexertion. And so oftentimes where we see a lot of, say, overhead reaching, sometimes that can't be changed in a warehouse right away. Racks are set up in a fixed nature. Product might be stored at a certain height or underneath a rack, and it's going to force certain movements. Okay, we may not be able to change all of that immediately, but it helps you see maybe which racks and bays are presenting the most risk factors, so that in the future or in the next 3 to 6 months, you can plan for how to make some additional workplace changes. Now, in terms of making changes and what this might look like to implement at your facility, Vic's going to talk through a little bit how this was deployed at IKEA and some of the things that went well for him.
Thanks, Heather. Yeah, we are taking the lead with our global partners in really looking at this Soder Coach device, and we're hopefully going to move into round 2 of testing and expand it. But I can tell you that the results we had were quite surprising, right? Because this was led in the actual unit. So one of our stores, we picked a store and a distribution center. So management support in one unit was outstanding. They decided on their own to wear the device, management, a handful of managers. prior to the coworkers uh, putting on the Soda Coach device, which I think was a smart move on their part because it really helped improve that participation and wear time. So their hazardous movements dropped from almost 50% to almost 30%. So, which was 10% lower or better than the other unit where they just deployed to our coworkers or employees without the management. So there was a smart move on their part. Obviously, not a clean control for us to determine if that was the only factor, but that same unit also um, made an early adoption to have new hires start wearing the device, which was also a smart move. So I think there were some really good things. We had really great feedback. There was 16% negative feedback. Everything else was either positive or neutral. So I think that was very encouraging. So I think overall it was, I think our appetite at IKEA, and if anyone shops with us or has been to one of our stores, we don't have many, right? We have like 51 stores in the US. You know what it's like to shop there, and you have a sense for what it could be like to work there, right? Where a store meets a working warehouse, like many other retailers. And I appreciate the some of the comments you made, Heather, about racking being fixed. Whoever designed racking was just strictly thinking about forklifts and not
Mhm.
people. And it's unfortunate, but I what I love about the device is that, like you said, it can identify, it can be your starting point, which is an outstanding, um, I think, benefit of using this device.
Yeah, I agree. Vic, do you happen to know, you mentioned new starters. Is IKEA experiencing high turnover rates like a lot of other retail places, or do you seem like the workforces are a bit more stable?
Yeah, unfortunately, we are seeing very high turnover, even in our own function. And when I say that, I mean the loss prevention asset protection function
Yeah.
is now equaling what the rest of the retail turnover is, and our warehouse turnover, which has not been the case in our function. We've been pretty good. So if we're seeing that, I would say, I would venture to guess that the rest of the loss prevention or asset protection or safety or security and whatever you want to call yourselves is seeing that. But yes, we're battling that um, retention piece is what we're seeing. So people come in, right, and we know that they're, even in the interview process, they're job shopping, right? They're looking and
Yeah.
waiting for a better offer of not much more money. So that, I think, that competitive edge we have to realize as a retailer in my vertical,
Yeah.
that unless you create some other value, they're walking.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And that's a great point. Um, so thanks for what went well in deployment. I I'm very pleased of, the positive feedback, but clearly whenever we, try something new, we have lessons learned. So I guess from your perspective, what are some of the areas for improvement?
Yeah, we tried to keep it a controlled or small test, but I think that worked against us. So I think for the next round, I would have liked to have, and I will in the future, use larger groups of employees or
Yeah.
coworkers. And I think that more data, the more data, the better. Um, how we can engage with our coworkers to improve total device wear time, right? Because our goal was 14 days, right? 14 days was, we determined, was probably a decent amount of time, plus or minus, to get the data, form some habits. Overall, during the test, we achieved 6 days, so just less than half. Still okay data, but how much better could it be? So how can we stretch that out a little further? And then tying that, as I mentioned before, is really the communication, change management. How do we engage management in a better way so that we get better, buy-in from our employees, and which would increase wear time. And part of that could have been our, communication or education wasn't where it needed to be. And then, of course, looking right early on at the point of hire. So there isn't so much change management, right? There's still an onboarding of this process and device. So I think those are the key areas that I would like to focus on, and obviously partner with Soder on as we engage more of our units and expanding that. When I say more people in our user groups, which mean more units as well.
Yeah. Vic, I'm curious for any other organization that could be considering, the use of wearable technology. Do you think that there was value in starting small? Um, you started with 4 sites.
Yeah, I think for us, we're anyone who's shopped with IKEA, and I might have said this before to you, Heather, right? We welcome our customer in our doors, and we immediately hand you a pencil and a piece of paper
Yeah.
to write down what you
Yes.
want to buy from us. And we've graduated a little bit. There's a QR code for our more tech savvy shopper, but I mean, I say that truthfully, but tongue in cheek, we're not a technology company, right? On the front end, on the back end, we might be, and how we move things around and how we handle our online business and fulfillment. But we really are a slow kind of change company, and introducing technology for us on all levels in all areas of the business, not just in the ergonomics or safety space is a challenge. So I think it was okay for us. It matched our appetite, but I also think it allowed us to learn some lessons on a small scale. And I know that not only as a safety professional, but as an organization, we are ready, right? We're hungry. Our appetite is there for certainly wearable devices.
That's great. The other thing I wanted to mention, IKEA, your goal was 14 days of wear time, and we averaged, around 6. Um, for the rest of the audience, a lot of organizations choose 10 days as the standard program length. So 10 days is how long an employee would wear the device. Um, we do have a couple that have reduced that time period, so it's only 7 days. And we are working with a couple of organizations that have made it 20 or 30 days. So part of it depends on an organization's culture and, just their expectations and what they're wanting to gain from the use of the wearables. Now, I see in the questions, there is in the chat box, there's the question around how is hazardous movement defined? And I'm just going to go back to that. These 2 slides right here, which will get shared with the audience, um, these are the hazardous movements. So the bending, the twisting, the intense bending, static posture, and repetition for the spine. And then for the shoulder, arm elevation, pushing and pulling, overexertion, static arm elevation, and repetitive arm movements. Those are what is defined as the hazardous movement. And under each image here, you can see the definition of what actually is arm elevation. How does Soder define that? So once you deploy this type of wearable technology, what can you expect from this? What we're looking at in the next few slides are results from an actual partner. Um, over the course of the last year or so, we've been working with them on different strategies for deployment. And what we're seeing with them is in their high risk group, we have almost 200 employees. And on the right hand side here, you can see high risk is defined as somebody that has more than 20 hazards per hour. So for these 200 people, they averaged about 43 hazards per hour. So that could be a makeup of bends, twists, intense bending, repetitive movements. 43 per hour. So that's almost 1 a minute. Within the duration of the program, they get this real-time feedback from the device and they start changing behaviors. They ended their average at the end of their 10-day program was 22 hazards per hour. So that's pretty substantial for just a device giving somebody some feedback. Um, you know, that's not the full solution, obviously, but getting them coached and trained to move better helps them not only in the work environment but at home too. Our employees have lives outside of work, and they want to stay active and do things outside of their work environment. So keeping them and teaching them how to move in ways that protects their back and shoulder outside of work is great. It helps them come into work the next day feeling well. This same organization, when we look at their shoulder hazards, we had 130 people that started in the high risk group, and they averaged 66 hazards per hour. And by the end of the program, we were able to reduce that to 32. So again, significant changes just through training. And I would, argue that this type of reduction in risk doesn't happen through talking to somebody, or doesn't happen by pulling a group of employees into a classroom and, going over 20 minutes of ergonomics slides and teaching them the basics of ergonomics. This real-time feedback really does help people change the way they move. In looking at this group of employees, we did a little year-over-year analysis to look and see how have they reduced injuries. So in the first year, 2021, we did a test pilot just at the end of Q2. And in that time period, January through June, they had 17 back and shoulder recordable injuries. We launched the Wearables program and started working with them on site to, get people educated and onboarded to the use of wearable technology. And so next year, we looked at just 11 recordables. And for this year, it's just 6. So it's clearly making an impact for this organization. And as I mentioned before, it's not the final solution. It's part of the solution. So what we want to do now is take all this information that we're gaining from the wearable devices and use it to drive some higher level controls. So when we use the data from the wearables, we can take a deeper dive, and we can use another piece of tech. We can use video processing maybe to take a more involved look at how a task is actually performed. So when we look at the information, we can see on the right-hand side here, we actually took some video of somebody wrapping a pallet. And we can see for the duration of this video, this person's back is bent, his neck's at a poor angle, he's doing a lot of, squatting, bending, reaching, and without even having to do too much analysis, this doesn't seem like a very efficient way to get this pallet wrapped. So through the use of, taking this video, we're working with this organization to actually purchase, it has been purchased, a pallet wrapper. Now, how did we even get to this point? Well, this organization started with the use of wearables, and we happened to see in our dashboard that there were certain employees whose hazards per hour wasn't really changing. It wasn't decreasing, and that's abnormal. So that to me was a red flag. That was an indicator that something in the work environment is causing this person to do all of this bending. Let's go investigate and see what he's doing. And so the site went out and took a video and uploaded it to the dashboard, and we were able to see in real time what's going on with this person. And in fact, when we play this video back in the dashboard, I can actually see the angle of this person's back for every second that he's moving around the pallet. And I can see that at times he's approaching a 90-degree bend. We use this video to go to management and request funding for a pallet wrapper. So that has been ordered, and we're looking to implement that within the next week. But this visual is a great way to, one, show the employee, hey, when you're moving like this, your back and your neck are at risk. What could we possibly do to change that for you? How might we change either what you're doing or how you're doing it so that we can make this easier for you? The flip side of this is Having a visual like this, along with overall risk scores, really helps you justify the cost of an ergonomic intervention. So being able to take this to management and put it in the capital request for a pallet wrapper was probably the thing that clinched it for them, being able to get that funding and purchase the pallet wrapper. Another example here, we talked about fixed racks and storage heights and locations. Um, this is an example where this distribution center happens to be massive. And so there's just tons and tons of racking space. And they ran out of storage space. So they started storing boxes on the floor. And you can see when she's, collecting the box, clearly it's putting her back at risk. And they have to do this all day long, especially during peak season when lots of things are going out over the holidays. Um, it's potential there. There's potential for risk of injury. So we actually tested in one area of their warehouse, changing the height of the racks. So eliminating storage on the floor altogether by adjusting the height of the other shelving racks. So instead of having just one box on each shelf, we actually had multiples. So instead of having, um, you know, product number XYZ stored on the floor and in rack 3, we have both of them now in the same rack location. So just a simple adjustment in how we stage things eliminated the need to bend to the floor. And the last example of, looking at how we might make a workplace change. This is showing you a glimpse of the dashboard. We can see here, this is a warehouse. They're picking up these basins, happen to be 23 pounds, and they have to pick them up and carry them and get them ready for shipping. So they bring them over to a box and they lay them down. And again, from an ergonomics perspective, we can all clearly see that this is not a great task. And certainly the back and shoulders are at risk of injury here. What we can see in further detail, though, is that on the right-hand side, his right arm and left arm is in the high-risk position for greater than 35% of the time. And he does this task dozens of times an hour. So that's a lot to ask of the back and the shoulders to be carrying and pushing around and holding overhead 23 pounds multiple times within an hour. So we use this data, showed it to management once again, talked to the employee. And we actually had a problem-solving session. We used some human-centered design strategies and talked through what we might do to change. And the short-term fix that they're going to try is actually an overhead hoist, just a simple chain system where they'll use that to carry the basin over to the box and package. Longer term future state for them, they're actually looking to start using robots to do a lot of this work and deploying their employees elsewhere, doing things that require less physical labor. So again, just being able to see the risk and how you might change design or the workspace so that we can reduce risk, having a visual is really helpful. Once you generate an idea and you then implement a solution, how do you know that you did the right thing? How do you prove that you made a positive impact or a positive change? Well, this is another way to use the video processing side. So on the left-hand side, we see somebody collecting boxes from underneath a storage rack, and this is how they normally do the job. We ask them not to change how they move. And in this scenario, we simply did some coaching. The warehouse wasn't set up just yet or ready to actually deploy a change strategy, but we just simply coach the person on how to move. And we can see through that, real-time intervention with him, and then being able to show this person the befores and afters in the video processing, it was able to show them when their bodies were at high risk, and by coaching and changing how they could reduce that risk. So we can see we eliminated almost all the high risk movements. There's very little red once we did some coaching adjustments. Now, in the future, they're going to look at some different rack storage here, and have, we'll call it like a grab factor, but essentially for the different products that they're moving, it's going to indicate before they even pick how many they can pick at a time. So if something weighs, 3 pounds, they're going to have a grab factor of, say, three. They're going to be able to pick up three of these items at one time. But if the product weighs, say, 20 pounds or it's a awkward shape, their grab factor might just be one. They're only going to be able to grab one at a time. So there's some different strategies that can get deployed, and being able to show somebody how they're moving, I think helps them create a visual memory of the change. So if I move in this way, I know that I'm reducing risk. So when we speak of, change and, how you then use this data, we're going to ask Vic, how might IKEA use the data? But lots of people ask us, okay, now I have a bunch of information. You do end up with a big data set. When you deploy wearables or use the video processing, you get a lot of information in a short amount of time. So the challenge then becomes you need to do something with that information. So, Vic, if you want to talk to us a bit about what IKEA could do or might do in the future, that'd be great.
Sure. Thanks. I love watching all those videos because they all could have been taken at IKEA in in our warehouse, in our distribution center, and our showroom floor. And what's interesting is, one of our stores, again, like I said, we've slowly been developing this acceptance and appetite, this acceptance that we have ergonomic uh, problems and injuries, and the desire to fix those. And one of our units some years ago said, "Hey, we want to count how many lifts. Like we don't really know how many lifts someone might do. And when we talk about lifts, just general lifts. So it was interesting to look at the video and see it's not just about the lift; it's all the movements within the lift. But we were shocked to find out that an average coworker in our warehouse, our self-serve warehouse, kind of like the Costco part of where you shop, uh, it was over 200 lifts in a shift, which is shocking. I wouldn't have guessed that. I would have guessed, oh, maybe you're doing, 4 or 5 an hour. You're helping a customer. Um, so the potential for us is massive in all areas of our business, whether you're working in display, uh, receiving and manual material handling, replenishment, the restaurant. I mean, name it, all kinds of areas. So to answer your question, I mean, there's several areas, right? And I love this discussion and the information you're presenting because, as you said, that's one piece, and we need to gather all the data so that we can make decisions, whether it's a process decision, an equipment
Mhm.
decision,
Yeah.
a training, administrative issue. So for us, it's really looking at what are our let's find out what our ergonomic issues are. I think we have a gut feeling, but like you said, to be able to quantify that, whether it's a video or the soda coach, is amazing. So where does our repetitive motion sit? Where in an office environment is our prolonged sitting or even incorrect posture? And for someone who has beat up his body pretty bad over the years, not at work, likely some work, but just in life in general, um, and has some neck and back issues, what could this device have done for me, in the
Yes.
early stages? And I think there was a comment in there that talked about um, the impact on healthcare costs, right? This is a long-term process. This is years. This is not
Yes.
a day. So I think gathering the data early is important. So um, really identifying where those are, then comparing it to all the different processes that we have, right? Whether it's an SOP or our job hazard analysis, I think is really critical. And that shrink wrap video was so amazing because you could do a job hazard analysis just with the video, right? and
Yeah.
and and look at ergonomic issues. And sure, there's other PPE you could probably assess there as the assessor. um, but then, and you touched on this, is like, what equipment do we need, right? To implement into the work processes to reduce those hazards. Where in our different areas of the warehouse, whether it's receiving, whether it's facilities, whether it's in the self-serve warehouse helping our customers and guests, and then really engaging with in a dialogue with our coworkers and involving them, I think is so important. Involving them early on, not just in the discussions but also the solutions. So I think that's going to be important for us. It's something we really try to do. We don't do a great job at it all the time. um, it's, sometimes we'll lead top down, and we really need to look at bottom up, because the end user here, our employee, is the one that's really at risk, and they need to be part of the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, IKEA has a pretty robust well-being and wellness program. So I could see, the technology being, a partner between both the safety and security and your wellness group. I would imagine those things kind of tie hand in hand.
They really do. It's a great point you make, because this initiative globally was launched through our health and well-being function, not our traditional occupational safety function. So I was a
Yeah,
partner that was brought on, and I think that's amazing.
yeah. Um, so you did a great job, talking to us about some of the good things that came up and how you might use the data, but surely there were some challenges. And from your perspective, what are some of the things that need to happen in order to overcome challenges? Technology is, it's ever evolving and it's definitely not going away, but there's still reluctance by employees to adopt. So what are some of the challenges you guys faced, and how might we overcome them?
I mean, I think as soon as we start talking about any type of change, right, it becomes to me, it was really difficult to answer this question, because there's
Yeah.
two aspects of it, right? There's the mindset, and then there's that change management process. So, and they're two completely different things, right? And sometimes the mindset, let's take management. Let's take Vic as a manager. I see X as a problem. Here is the solution. Go and implement without really having discussion, without really understanding what other people's mindsets are about the issue or the problem. So I think setting up a successful, potentially successful environment really requires discussion first and acknowledgement of the problem. So talking about why we would be taking video of an employee, right, and teaching them and showing them, and then taking that to management and understanding, I think those are all great processes, because that helps change mindset. And then the actual change management, and I made a comment here about right about insanity. um,
Yes.
and we do it all the time. We are completely insane at IKEA. We do it all the time. We expect a different result. And then I think the change management piece is so important, and there's so many aspects of change management. The communication plan is so important ahead of time, but many times, and we do it all every day, we just launch, push, and
Yeah.
then we wonder why. How come participation's low, and how come the engagement scores are low? How come the happy customer score is this? So I think that's so important. Really, I think taking an expert partner in change management if we're going to introduce something large like this. And then you said it already. This is one piece in a massive ergonomics program. And when I say massive, I mean all encompassing. It's not impossible. And I know for some people, like, who might be in early stages, like us at IKEA, who might be like, I don't know about this. I don't know if this is for me. I encourage you to jump in and take a partner with Soder, have some discussions, see what's possible, run some tests, because this is just one little piece of it, but it also helps in many areas of the entire cycle. So, right, we talk about training and awareness, we talk about equipment. The equipment, well, the errors and the incorrect hazard or the hazardous movements are identifying the need for the equipment. When, if as a practitioner, a safety practitioner, we had done an effective job in the first place doing a job hazard analysis, we would have identified that early on.
Yeah, and I love what you've said a couple of times just about the engagement and the change management side, because the I really think that, for me, ergonomics throughout my entire career has really been a win-win situation. When you work with the employees and you do some grassroots brainstorming and you come up with ideas together, you're engaging them in the process. When you actually make those changes, you're making their lives a little bit better, because oftentimes if we're making an ergonomic improvement, it's making their job easier. Um, and I guess the side benefit that comes out of that is sometimes we really hit the holy grail, and our ergonomic intervention not only reduces injuries, but it's increased productivity. And so I think that, ergonomics in general is just a great program to engage people. And when you put your employees through, a wearables program or even the video processing, they learn a lot. They just, the amount of learning that takes place to me is really astounding. And I appreciate that you've talked so much about really engaging people in the process, because I think that's so important. If we, you know, quickly look at just a couple of examples in the U.S. of where we've deployed this type of technology. We've heard from Vic and some of the things that have happened at IKEA and the results there. Um, we've worked with a very large distribution center that was struggling with turnover, and also MSD, or musculoskeletal disorder injuries. Um, they're they partnered with Soder to try to curb some of that. And so we deployed wearable technology to their new hires. And in fact, their new hires could range anywhere from 30 to 70 people each week. So we're talking a lot of people. And the amount of turnover there was substantial. And so, of course, that's impacting the ability to get work done, because you're constantly having to hire and train new people. And so it seems like there's always a learning curve that's taking place. Their hope was that if they could find ways to help people learn a piece of their safety training, the ergonomic side, in real time, not in the classroom, that perhaps that could be helpful and just more efficient in terms of having people work and not taking time away to sit in a classroom. But also, the thought was, if we can help people move better, will they be less sore and more inclined to stay with us? And so this project is ongoing, but thus far it's been successful, and we've certainly had some lessons learned. It did start with new hires, and at one point, probably 6 months into the project, we decided, why not try this with some of the tenured people as well? Some of the people that have been here more than a year or 5 years or 10 years. And what we learned from that was, in fact, some of those tenured people actually made greater change and greater improvements than those new hires. And they were open to using the technology and open to change. Um, we took this a step further with this organization and actually brought in an on-site trainer, a physical therapy assistant, to help just manage this program on a daily basis. And where we see in the dashboard, certain people maybe aren't improving, that trainer is there on site, and they're able to go work with those employees to figure out, is it an actual person issue, or is it a work environment issue? And then they're kind of the liaison between safety and management to drive the next level of change. And another example of a partnership, working with Win Canton, they're moving a lot of products. They're picking, packing, dispatching all sorts of products and goods to an end user. And we know from their data that almost a quarter of their products weigh over 30 pounds. So that's a lot of movement of heavier heavier materials that could be in all shapes and sizes. And so um, we did a smaller scale, kind of similar to IKEA, smaller scale launch where we deployed this with a smaller group of employees, and we were able to see a 30% reduction in the spine hazards per hour. Um, that's that's substantial across this group of employees within this distribution center. Um, we can then use that and have used that data to provide additional support. Some of it would include or does include specific stretching for the work that they're doing. And then, as we work on just these admin controls, coaching and training people, getting some stretching up and running, we're also looking to make some additional workspace changes. But this organization has gone 250 days without a lost time injury. So for them, this is a huge win. Major improvements for them. Um, as we begin to wrap up, we've shared a lot of information about deployment and some of the hurdles and expected outcomes. But if you're thinking about the use of technology, whether it's wearables or video processing, there are a lot of ways that you could use this technology. You can use it as part of the onboarding process for new hires. You can purely use it just to identify risk. And then once you identify that risk, maybe you're using it to justify the cost of an engineering or process change. Vic mentioned JSAs. Absolutely. These can be built into your JSAs and certainly rolled into Kaizen events. You can use this purely for the behavior modification. Some organizations aren't ready to go to those higher level of controls. If you can simply deploy technology and reduce the risk of injury by 30 to 50%, well, that's a pretty big jump. That's a big move with a very minimal effort on anybody's part. The data that you get from these wearable devices, yeah, you could build that right into job descriptions or what you might call a physical demand analysis. The wearables can get used when somebody returns to work. So they get injured, they report back to work, and as part of their return to work, you have them wear a device just to ensure that they're learning and moving in ways that don't re-aggravate the injury. And then, of course, you can just embed this into your overall training. It can be a refresher training. It can be an annual training. Many organizations will deploy the wearable technology and have their employees wear it for 10 days, maybe 20 days, and then a year later or 6 months later they have those same groups of employees go back through. This time they're having the employees wear the device for 5 days for a refresher training. But this type of technology can definitely get embedded into your training programs. So I would ask, I think I've answered questions that came up in the chat box, but if there are any other questions, please feel free to drop those in the chat box now, and Vic and I can answer those. If not, we will be sending out a recording of this session as well as the PowerPoint, so you're able to access this later. Vic, do you have any closing remarks that you'd like to make or words of wisdoms for people that might be considering this type of technology?
Thanks, Heather. Again, thanks for having me. I think your last slide on the use cases was probably for me the most impactful because, like I talked about, right, this is one piece in the entire ecosystem, but
Mhm.
it touches so many parts, right? There's so many other benefits. We're in the very early stages. We're scratching the surface. I love this dialogue. I love this topic
Yes.
because this has been a massive blind spot for us at IKEA. I'm sure it is for probably other retailers. If you're in the retail vertical or whatever vertical you are, you're here because you're curious. And I hope you're still with us. I would just encourage you to ask more questions. If it's not with Soder, that's unfortunate because they have a lot of value, but just continue your journey and really engage and use Soda as a partner. They have been a fantastic partner for us. I mean, I've had meetings and meetings and discussions and just the engagement and the
Mhm.
willingness to partner, I think, is really important as part
Uh,
of the learning and the change management process, probably for yourself.
Yes, thank you, Vic. We've really enjoyed working with you and having you as a partner. Very much
Thank you.
appreciated. Um, I don't see any other questions at the moment, so I will end the recording and we will happily share this with you. Please reach out if you have any questions. We are more than happy to meet with you individually. Thank you all for joining.